iHeartRadio with the Justice team, Justina Winfrey and Mr. John Carter. Mr. Carter.
Happy New Year to everyone, and it's great to be online with you again this evening. I hope everyone had a great Christmas and a Happy New Year. It's great to be here tonight.
Wonderful. Yes, this beautiful, beautiful January 3rd, 2017. We are truly blessed to be here. And we are thankful that you are tuned in with us this evening. Mr. Carter and I, on the way in, briefly talked about, and I know we had a few things that we were going to discuss before jumping into this, but it seems like the situation that is really impacting the city of Chicago right now, and it's basically global, the violence. So can we briefly touch base on solutions? Once again, we've heard from the former chief of police, McCarthy. We've heard from many people who have given their opinion just recently on CNN. Can we get a little feedback from you, Mr. Carter, and just basically a summary of the current media, what the media thinks of Chicago and the violence and their so-called solutions?
Well, what the media has reported that there were about 12 killings in Chicago over Christmas weekend, which is absolutely insane during that time of year when families are usually coming together and it's a time of celebration and reflection and giving, that you have folks out there that running rampant taking lives. What the media is actually reporting is that the Windy City saw about 3,550 shooting incidents, and of those, 762 of them were murders in 2016. So if you do the math, that averages out to 2 murders and nearly 10 shootings every single day in Chicago. That is a big increase because over the, since 2013, the number of homicides that have happened in the city of Chicago have actually doubled. And, this is with all of the gun control measures in place and putting all these requirements on people. And notice all they've done is just restrict law-abiding people from carrying guns and actually having the opportunity to defend themselves. The rationale was that, hey, just call the police and allow the police to do their job and they'll protect you. That is a misnomer because the police are reactive to anything that happens. They're not proactive, especially as we talked about last week, when you have a city that does not embrace the concept of community-based policing. Mm-hmm. They do team policing. And I believe that in an interview with one of the police officials the other night, he clearly expressed that until and unless the city of Chicago embraces the concept of community-based policing, what we talked about last week, Justina, where they get out of the cars and they get to know the neighbors, walking around, or they're actually interacting with kids and folks in the community, this problem is not going to ever resolve itself. It's going to get worse. What was significant to me is that the media talked about empowered gang members. How can a gang member be empowered? I mean, these folks don't pay taxes on any property. They just, by attrition, they just take over. Now, in most other situations, a person who takes a gun and goes into a community or mall or store and they cause terror and havoc and just panic in a situation and they take things by force and take lives, they're usually labeled as terrorists. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to domestic things, we label them as either like a white supremacist group, we label it as a hate crime, we label it as gang activity, we label it as everything other than what it really is. It's still acts of terrorism because there's federal law that take extreme measures against people that engage in that kind of conduct. It kind of puts us in an odd stance because on the one hand, we're empathetic to folks of color that have been targeted by policing agencies and the government to incarcerate and felonize the conduct of Black folks, especially Black men. However, when you look out on the street, that's who you see committing a lot of this violence in the communities that they allegedly are supposed to be living in. And it's just tragic. It's just really tragic. One of the problems that the media reported is because the police do not do the same policing in Black neighborhoods as they do white neighborhoods. Because while we look at these trends of violence, they reported that it's mostly in South Chicago, and I guess on the South side and on the West side. But in certain communities where there's a lack of Black presence, we don't see these kind of problems, or you don't see those kind of problems where if you call the police, they don't show up. If you call the police, you have a lack of response or no response. But in certain communities where there's a high concentration of people of color, they either don't respond or the response is really slow, or if they do respond, they come out like a little small army because the officers, according to one of the police officials, are afraid for their lives. And they don't want to go in and police their neighborhoods because of the gang activity. Okay, then get rid of the gang. And being a law enforcement agent, a person myself for 28 years, let me emphatically say that if there's officers out there that are afraid to do their job because of the folks that are on the street that you have taken an oath to protect and defend innocent people from, you need to find another job. That's just like a person joining the Marine Corps or joining the Army and then get in and say, well, I'm a conscientious objector. I don't believe in shooting people. So if the crap hits the fan and we have to go out and assault a hill, then I don't want to go because I'm sure that there's an enemy up there and I might have to put myself in jeopardy of being shot or harmed or blown up to go after them. In Vietnam, that kind of person, if the soldiers around him or the other Marines around him found out that they had that type of attitude, he was found with a bullet in him, but it wasn't an enemy bullet because they took care of that problem so it wouldn't infect the morale of everyone else. He didn't even have a chance to attack the hill in the first place. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but that's just the reality of how things worked back then. So how do we tackle this problem now? We have to get this community-based policing relationship done. No matter what it takes, throwing money at the problem, hiring another 1,000 officers, except if you're going to put them on the street to actually do some community-based policing, then sure, put 1,000 officers on the street. If they're going to be contacting folks and knocking on doors and hugging babies and talking to the old folks and sitting on their porch having coffee, they need to be very visible and out in the community. One of the things I think they should do, and this was effective back in the old days, get those officers out of the cars and put them on a beat where they're walking the street. Have them two at a time, and not just down in the parks, but put them in the neighborhoods where the officers are actually on bicycles or they're walking the street, because you know what? You see more and hear more when you're not necessarily in a vehicle. That also gets them out where they have to get to know folks in the community. If there's a high police presence, it'll move the bad guys somewhere else. I mean, they'll just keep shifting until they don't have any territory anymore because the police are around. Forget the bleeding heart liberals that are trying to save the world from everything, that start saying, well, that's a police state. That looks like a lot like a police state. Well, guess what? You have an emergency situation where allegedly the gangs have taken over your neighborhood, and it really isn't just the gangs. It's also the worthless, crooked politicians that don't have your best interests at heart, that have allowed those communities to come into that state by not doing what's necessary to bring the funds and the other resources in the community, that folks don't have to act that way in the first place. That's the problem. And Justina, we've talked about this several times now, that if you really want to get to the real root of the problem, look at the elected officials that took an oath of office to represent the folks in those communities and look at what they're really doing. Years ago, the Nation of Islam had taken up a project to save the community a block at a time. And what they did, they got this organization of men called the Fruit of Islam, and they got out on the street, and they didn't go out there acting a fool with guns and committing a bunch of violence, but because a lot of them grew up in that neighborhood, they knew these guys with guns, and they went up to them, look, brother, this is not right, and they talked to those folks, and the Nation of Islam, the Fruit of Islam, was able to quell a lot of the violence. Years past, that was effective. It worked, and folks had respect for them more than the police because they actually got out and they talked to people. Now, why that won't work again, I'm not really sure. But from what I understand, a lot of those guys have now, they become a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution. And if that's the issue, that's certainly why it won't work.
Well, but I do know for a fact that currently with the here in Chicago and nationally, the nation has the local organizing committee, the LOC, and I do know several people who are a part of it. They were a part of the smaller groups nationally and locally to bring the most recent event that was in DC in 2015, the commemoration of the Million Man March. So I do know that locally they are calling to action organizations and individuals who are active in the community and who want to become active in the community to bring solutions to the table. They actually have a meeting here in Chicago every Wednesday at the Muhammad University, and I believe it starts at 7 p.m.
No, that's good. I mean, that's a start. And
yes,
those gentlemen, once upon a time, and maybe this time has passed, were very effective in getting youth, especially black youth, but not just them, but I mean, they reached across the table. They were everybody, but they talked about economic development, they talked about empowerment, they talked about social justice, they talked about social change, but they also instilled a sense in people that they were someone, and despite all of the obstacles and the hindrances, if you put forth the effort, you can better your life and the lives of the folks around you. Now, why that rhetoric and that philosophy has changed over, more recent years, I don't know. But I know at once upon a time, it was an extremely powerful tool and resource in the community that actually worked. And, we haven't seen that in more than a decade now, that the Nation of Islam and the Fruit of Islam in those communities like Chicago, and especially in Chicago where they first, pulled this off, he did it. It worked. For some reason, those goals have changed. And I don't know. Did all those guys also, get arrested somehow and end up going to jail? And so the reason they're not on the street is because the politicians have authorized them to all be incarcerated again. So you don't have the good guys on the street and there's only the bad guys left? Or is it that they become so disenfranchised with the lack of support from the community that they just left the community altogether, and they're no longer living there themselves, that they're living in places like Bolingbrook, and Aurora or wherever. And so they're not in those impacted neighborhoods anymore because they moved away. I don't know. And I don't know the answer to that. But someone who lives there does.
There are multiple reasons, and we've talked about this before. I keep going back to the National Black Agenda, nbacchicago.org, nbacchicago.org. We took and put together an entire comprehensive agenda. It's about 60 plus pages, full of great research, but not only research and information to educate the community about the issues. We offer solutions along with public policy recommendations. And this document is actually updated on an annual basis. And it welcomes the community, not only the community, but organizations with their valid input, okay? Now, I say this to say that none of us know the right answer. It's a collective. With community policing, to me, it's no different than the Community Schools Initiative, okay? It's a comprehensive collective of all of us coming together elected officials, community members, the schools, the regular folks in the community who really don't care to be a part of the community, but they need the little things done, in their environment. My point is, if everyone continues to turn a blind eye around what's going on in our communities, and if everyone, elected officials included, continue to say, it's not my problem, then this will continue to happen. And we do understand that it's engineered for this to happen. People don't believe in the Willie Lynch letter, and I get that. But unfortunately, when you read that 4-page letter, the truth of the matter is, so much of what is going on right now and so much of what has happened historically mirrors every single paragraph in that 4-page letter. So, what solution? What is the solution? There is no one solution. We can all agree to that. But the fact that we're here, we're having this discussion, we are trying to bring multiple solutions to the table so that people can begin to act on the information and the knowledge that they receive. So,
Yeah, that's true.
Now, back to the police being called and not responding. I encourage people in the community to keep calling 911. Make them do their job. Document how many times you call, because we hear too many gunshots throughout the day, early in the morning and in the evening, for there to be so many murders and for police stations to be within blocks of these murders speaks volumes to not only our elected leadership, but also our police leadership.
Yeah, well, I told you a few weeks ago, in my humble opinion, which probably doesn't mean a hill of beans out there, you need a new police chief because this never should have gotten this far. And if I had officers on my department that I knew for a fact and the community knew at large that they were unresponsive or very slow to respond, those men and women, by that following Monday of that following week, I promise you, they will be looking for another job. The turnover would be so high until I got the right ones, I would just keep turning them over. Now, Donald Trump has sent a strong message the other day that either the mayor and the chief get that city together and do something about all of these murders, or he's going to send the feds in. Now, I don't know what kind of rhetoric he thinks that's going to do, because I can tell you right now that sending in troops will make that a true, police state, and there'll be curfews in place, and all that does is hurt the law-abiding folks in the community, because folks are still going to be out breaking that curfew. They'll just be challenging the fact of getting caught. They'll just be taking random pot shots at these now troops. More than likely they'll be National Guard members than anything else, which would be unfortunate. And folks won't be able to have the liberty to move around. But in the end, what is that going to accomplish? Because once they lift that mandate, it's just going to go back to the status quo. Because until they fix the social economic problems in the community, until they bring back the jobs and economic opportunity to the community, to give folks options, until they improve the quality of housing and the quality of lives for folks who live in those communities, until they do that, it's going to go right back to the same thing. And that's why it's getting worse and worse and worse. The banks are not being held to uphold their obligation under the Community Reinvestment Act. Those communities should have never fallen into the state of disrepair and hopelessness that they're in right now. And there are banks in that state that make multiply millions of dollars every year from the backs of people that work and contribute to them on a weekly basis. The churches in the community. Now, I'm sure that the churches haven't uprooted and plucked themselves up and moved out of community. Maybe some of them have. And the ones that have done that should not be invited back. But there should be some preachers men and women that have the intestinal fortitude to go back into those communities, to plant those churches there. And their goal, their theme of that church should be from poverty to power. And they should endeavor to make every family that's on welfare to become empowered, to become business owners, to become entrepreneurs. They should have a goal that every family that's renting property, they become owners of property, because that's what empowers a family, a person, an individual, whatever, is to be an owner of property. And it's that way in our Constitution. It's always been that way. But if the churches and the pastors don't empower the people, then what's going to happen? Preachers have got to go back to the old time way of being leaders in the community and not be worried so much about being the biggest pimp on the block or in the community, because over the years, that's what's happened. You see all these $100 preachers with all this money, and folks, say, I'm not going to go to church because I'm tired of giving folks all my money. And when you go to church nowadays, except for very few evangelical churches, the churches are old, or because the membership is old. Or you go to the church, and when you arrive down there, it's a beautiful building, great edifice, but you walk in there, and they have seating for 1,000 people, but there's less than 200 in the whole building. And they're the ones that's really carrying the whole burden of keeping the doors of that place open. What happened to the support of the community of those churches is because the church has stopped giving back to the community. And I'm going to tell you, giving people a turkey for Thanksgiving or giving people a turkey for Christmas, that's not community outreach.
Right. So
that just isn't going to get it. You have to empower people to become socially and economically responsible. You got to teach them how to eat, and you have to give them the tools to do it. And the church is a great vehicle to do it, but you cannot be a prophet and a pimp at the same time. You just cannot do that.
So it seems like through education, one of the key things that the community would need to understand is why we even think the way that we think, okay? All of the issues that surround the true core of why our people have allowed this situation to continue to go on for so long, okay? We hear about it, we are aware of it, we hear some of the solutions that are thrown around, we see the marching. Dr. Joy DeGruy, DeGruy, she developed a theory called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And she did many years of research, and she published her studies. And she actually wrote the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. And basically, the theory is called PTSS. And it explains the etiology of many of the adaptive survival behaviors in African American communities throughout the United States and the diaspora. It is a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants, resulting from centuries of chattel slavery, a form of slavery which was predicated on the belief that African Americans were inherently genetically inferior to whites. This was then followed by institutionalized racism, which continues to perpetuate injury. All of our issues right now, at the root of every single issue, from the violence, from the disinvestment in the communities, the poverty, the lack of accountability for the banks and the Community Reinvestment Act, the lack of accountability in the community for constituents allowing other people and organizations to capitalize on the community. When they don't live in the community, all they do is come in the community and get money in the community. It's just that simple. And they definitely don't respect the community. Why do we continue to allow this abuse time and time again? Go one of the points Dr. Joy pointed out was that they meaning at one point with regard to African Americans have never gone through the psychological therapy that has been needed post-slavery. Okay, one of the pushes right now that LaShawn Ford, state representative here in Illinois, is pushing is for President Obama to mandate a study on the impact of slavery. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to say this because until we fully understand the impact, we're only going back towards slavery. And Mr. Carter, you understand that.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing about always looking to your past to see where you're going. Let me look at it from another perspective. All right, say if a woman and a man got together and she just wooed that man, and man, she thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they dated. But during the relationship, she found out that this guy was a manipulator, he was abusive, he was a liar, he brought all kinds of diseases to her. And at first, because she loved him, she might, put up with it. Man or woman alike, because you can say that a woman can do the same thing to a man. So I'm not just saying that it's one-sided, because any kind of inequity in a relationship can very, very easily go both ways. But I'm just using this as an example. Okay, so at some point, if she's smart, if she's worth her salt as a woman, she will recognize that, hey, this relationship is no good for me. I need to get out of it and I need to move on. So let's say she decides to move on. She gets tired of the abuse. She gets tired of the lies. She realizes she don't have the words, everlast written across her head, so she's not a punching bag. And she decides to sever that relationship and move on. And she does. She gets on her feet, opens her business, she gets going. And now the quality of her life has improved. She has her own car, she bought her own house, her credit is improved. Do you think that she would go back and pick up the same garbage that she left, be abused again? Do you think that soul will return to wallow in the mire that she left, now that she knows better? Because if she doesn't know any better or doesn't do any better for herself, she's always going to become dependent on the person that she thinks she needs in her life. She become codependent on them because she thinks she needs them to take care of them. And she will always find an excuse to be in that situation. But if you get a person who pulls themselves up, get educated, learn better, and have the tenacity to move on, they usually don't go back. Now, I'm using that analogy because a lot of folks can relate to that because they've got out of bad situations and they vow to themselves that they won't go back to them. Once a community has fallen into the state that a lot of those communities, or some of those communities back there have, folks have to realize that once upon a time, it wasn't this way. So through education, through social economic development, through economic empowerment, they can pull themselves up. But if it happens, we can't always look back at what happened to us 100 years ago. We need to know the history so we don't return to it. That's absolutely essentially important. But you know what other cultures do? Because they're also oppressed. Folks haven't always given them everything. Certainly they have a lot of advantages more than African American people have by far. But you know what they do? They go into a community and they enhance it. When you see the Vietnamese, when you see the Filipinos, when you see the Hispanics go into a community, if they are oppressed and treated badly, they start buying it up. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, you got Chinatown, the little Asian market, the little Vietnam, the little Saigon. I mean, they take over an area and become an economic empowerment zone in and of itself, so much that the city and the people will even name it after them, after what they've done. And they buy the shops, they buy the businesses, they start buying real estate, and they help each other and they empower one another. Do you know the only culture of people on this planet that don't do that are black folks?
Yep.
But then we say, well, but that's because we were slaves and we've been damaged by that. But at some point, with all of the education that we have now, and with all of the things and the social media and television and schools and all the other resources that have been put at our disposal, somehow we have had to have educated ourselves or come out of this mindset of slavery and poverty. We know that it existed, but to make an excuse that I'm the way that I am now because of something that happened, 400 years ago, while that may be some truism in that, it's no excuse for me to shoot people down like dogs on the street right now, because I know better. And there are other opportunities, no matter how white folks, Jewish folks, Italian people, Spanish folks, whatever you call them, I don't care what culture of people it is, it's no excuse for you to shoot down other black folks because of the way that something happened 300, 400, 500 years ago. And actually, slavery wasn't even 400 years ago. Slavery was a little less than 200 years ago in this country. So we don't even have to go back 400 years. That's a lot, because my great-great-grandmother was a slave, and so was yours, more likely than not. And, they're not 400 years ago. It wasn't 400 years ago that you had a great-great-grandmother. You get two 72-year-old women, and you can go back and touch somebody that was a slave in this country if they were black or had a relative that was. So it wasn't all that long ago. So I'm not even going to listen to the hype of people telling me, oh, it was 400 years ago. No, it wasn't. It wasn't all that long ago. Do you know when black folks really started going down the hill? Is when integration became prominent in this country. And we were allowed to leave our communities and leave our neighborhoods and go anywhere we want that our money would take us. When integration came along, we lost our cotton picking minds, so to speak, because as long as we had no choice but to get along with our own and to attend our churches and to build our businesses and to support one another in our own communities and to empower our kids in our schools, we had great neighborhoods. We didn't have these issues that we're having right now. There were a few wild, cards out there, but everybody knew who they were, and everyone did what they could to help them. And if they couldn't, and if they didn't conform, we just dismissed them. But once integration came along, the black folks who could left the hood. And when they leave, they don't contribute back, not like they should or like they can. They just leave. And then the ones that go to jail and go to prison, when they get out, they don't have options, because you cannot rehabilitate people that have not been habilitated in the first place. And so you got guys who dropped out of school, who didn't have a lot of economic opportunities, who get forced back into a community because they can't afford to go anywhere else except to sell drugs. And if they sell drugs and don't have a job and they go live in a community outside of where they are right now, how long do you think they last living there? And now with the credit reporting and the way society has set up, they won't even rent you a house or an apartment somewhere where you don't have a viable, stable, or a verifiable income to say how you get in the money. Because now they become smart that, hey, if you allow these folks in that don't have legitimate or credible income and can't explain how they got their money, they're going to bring those problems to our neighborhood, so they keep them shut out. Those are the things that's going on. So before we can fix other folks, we really need to look inside and fix ourselves. I appreciate the studies on slavery. I appreciate the folks who want the 40 acres and the mule after all of this time. I appreciate the folks who really go out there and say, hey, the education can help us, because I believe in all of those things. But I also believe that as a community, we can just make a decision that we're not going to tolerate this foolishness anymore and just make it better. Because once upon a time, even in my lifetime, the community wasn't like that. See, I was alive and I was around when you couldn't sit, if you were black, at a lunch counter and order a sandwich and a cup of coffee. I was alive during that time. I was alive in 1981 when Michael Donald was hung. He was castrated and hung by the neck until he was dead in Mobile, Alabama. I was alive during that time. I just had got out of high school. So it wasn't back 200 or 400 years ago that they were lynching Negroes in this country. They were doing it in 1981 physically, and they're doing it in 2016 and 2017 through the prison system and the jail system, and they're keeping us oppressed by what they're doing. And now we're saying that the police won't even come and police our neighborhoods that we pay taxes for them to do that, just like everybody else. But we put up with it, and it doesn't get any better because those things we stay silent about. We cry about them. We tweet about it on social media. We rant about it on Facebook, but no one will come to the community meetings that matter and actually get out and do something about it. That's what a disconnect is. When these meetings happen, Justina, how many of the preachers from the communities that's getting money weekly from these folks come to those meetings and then don't just sit there and listen and have a meeting, but invest their money and their time back into that community to make it better? How many of them are standing out there on the street corner trying to get people to come in to an economic development summit or meeting? Because here's the difference between the preacher and the drug dealer. If I want to learn about God, if I want to learn about how to make my life better, if I want to learn how to improve my family, I have to go to the church house. I have to go find that preacher. I have to go to a specific place where he is to be ministered to. But the drug dealer goes to the school. He goes to the mall. He goes to the street corner. He goes everywhere that your child goes, and the drug dealer even will go to church too. But the preacher won't do that. That's the difference. That's why we see the violence. The salvation is only going to be in getting folks to look at things from a different point of view, from a different perspective. No one owes us anything. We owe everything to ourselves. And once we realize that, we'll own it. If you want to improve the quality of your life, you have to get angry enough to do something about it. No one's going to give it to you. No one's going to do that. They're only going to talk about it. That's it.
I have so much to say on this issue, and I'm restraining myself right now, but I can't. The leadership here in Chicago, the leadership nationally, these are very small circles, okay? And Republican, Democrat, truth be told, many of the agendas are the same. They're implemented different, but they're the same. And if they have a dollar amount behind them, a budget, the powers that be control that money. And until we really have to get back to education, civic engagement. Workforce development and economic development is absolutely necessary. Once we get our community trained and employed, you're right. Are they going to give back? Or are they going to pack up, pick up, and move out of the community? Until we as a community educate our community on the importance of civic engagement, the importance of not only our vote, but understanding the impact of a law and how, again, we've continued to turn a blind eye to the things that are currently happening right before our eyes, and we allow these laws to be passed. But in order for people to understand what's happening, I'm not saying go to college. You don't have to go to college. You don't even have to graduate with a high school diploma to just simply follow the events, you know, Tune in into what's going on. And you're right, the community events are necessary. But I tell you one thing, aside from depending on the community church events, look up your local alderman. Look up your ward, look up your local alderman's website address. They publish their monthly aldermanic meetings in their ward. They have a weekly event, a weekly schedule where constituents can come in weekly into their office. Go speak with them. Tell them what the problem is in your community, on your block. Document. Start to document the dates and the times that you hear the gunshots. Start to document the dates and the times. If you don't want to call the police, call your alderman's office. It's their duty to contact the police because they have a direct person that works with Chicago Police Department if you're not comfortable with calling 911. What I'm saying to you is, community, we have to be more proactive in our role and duty. Until it touches home, no one cares. Not that long ago, we had a congressman lose his 15-year-old grandson to gun violence in the same district that he's congressman, here in Illinois, and it's the 7th congressional district. And my heart goes out to him. It's just sickening that it had to touch so close to home for folks to really start to realize that there is a problem here. And it's a poor reflection on our leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's a poor reflection on our constituents, too. Let's be clear, we all have a role. We all have a role. And the guys out there with the guns shooting, we know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we know who they are. So if you want to continue to keep your community unstable and unsafe because you want to continue to turn a blind eye to the guys on the block, you're not doing them any justice. Now, my biggest dilemma, and John, you know, we've discussed this, was I don't want to call the police on my brothers. I don't want to see my brothers going to jail. But I tell you one thing, when my brothers are out there shooting, my brothers are not caring about where those bullets are flying. So, yes, I agree. We need workforce development. We need community economic development. We don't need more police. Okay? No, we don't need more police, but at the same time, there is a level of accountability within ourselves, right from wrong. And when we get back to the psyche and the mental state of people living in poverty, it's a devastating, traumatic situation. The mental health issues on the west side and the south side of Chicago, not to mention that a few years ago, under Governor Quinn, many mental health institutions were shut down due to a budget deficit. Where did all of these folks go? Into poor communities.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And we're not talking about older, we're talking about young people who are schizophrenic and bipolar. Who knows? Now okay. One of the big issues that the current police chief had been talking about was the algorithms and the fact that now they're trying to use data science to track potential threats. Okay. Now, here's the issue that I have. It's kind of like thinking of, do you remember the movie Minority Report?
Mm-hmm.
And the thought crime and the anticipated crime that could potentially happen? While they're out chasing algorithms, real crimes are happening. When I was an undergrad going to Western, where they trained many of the Chicago police officers as LEJA, Law Enforcement Justice Administration majors, guess what? Many of those officers never sat next to a black person. They never sat next to a Latino, okay? Because they're from predominantly Caucasian communities, okay? And then they're trained in a predominantly Caucasian community in Macomb, Illinois. So I say all of this to say these cliques, this culture of quote unquote us against them, until we have a level of accountability within ourselves, within our own communities. We have, like you said, we have to look at self first, and we have to be willing to truly step out and do something about it, other than just talking about it and saying, I'm tired of the shooting, I'm tired of the gun violence, Go stand on your porch, stand on your block, stand in front of the property where you pay taxes. Because I have no problem with telling a young man, you don't pay taxes right here, sweetheart. Please don't stand in front of this property. I'd rather talk to them in a respectful, polite way, as opposed to calling the police. Why? Because it's a wasted call. The police are not going to come. They're not going to show up, even if they're shooting. They're not coming because they're scared and they don't care. That's just the truth of the matter.
Yeah, well, see, one of the things that needs to be addressed right now is that I don't know why the community at large, especially the so-called leadership community, find that to be, an acceptable practice and mindset for the police department. Remember, those people are there to serve you. But see, I forgot. The politicians are the same way. They're actually serving the people. But in our culture now, it's us against them. Somehow politicians have become their own class and culture of people. And we say the government is this and the government is that, but we are the government. So let's not forget that. And if those people are not serving the public good, then they need to be moved out of office. And I keep saying that. And actually, after tonight, I'm not even going to broach that subject again, because it's quite apparent it isn't going to happen. Because those politicians are so entrenched and folks are so used to the backwardness that they've been living in all this time that they're not going to rise up to do anything like that. But maybe
John, as we wrap up, I think we do need to have that conversation. And I won't say a last time. I think we need to have a more detailed, in-depth, step-by-step, step 1 through 10 conversation on how to recall elected officials. Next on Consumer Legal Hour with the Justice Team, Mr. John Carter and Justina Winfrey. Happy New Year, January 3rd, 2017, Intellectual Radio and iHeartRadio. Have a blessed evening. Mr. Carter, signing off.